Welcome. Today we're going to begin the study of the book of Kohelet, and that's the famous book of Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season and a time and a purpose for everything under heaven. One of the most well-known verses, and there's a lot of other verses that are very famous as well. So let's dive in. It's a fascinating book. And we'll try to tackle a chapter a week, and within 12 weeks, we'll have completed Kohelet. I want to start by referring to a famous teaching that comes in the Midrash. Rabbi Yochanan says that King Solomon wrote 3 books. The first book, when he was a young man, was Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is filled with love poetry. And Rabbi Yochanan says a young man is consumed and concerned mainly with love, and so that's what Solomon wrote when he was young. When he matured, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Solomon wrote Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. We've heard a lot about Proverbs in the quotes that we've made from it in Pirkei Avot. And it's basically wisdom. And the idea is that Solomon, the wisest of all men, was offering his wisdom in the book of Proverbs. And then finally, Rabbi Yochanan tells us when a man is old, he looks back and he talks of life's vanities. And so it was as an old man before his death that Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And very shortly, we'll see why Rabbi Yochanan assumed that. But before we even open the book, I need just to place the book within its biblical context. So here, let's look at the Tanakh. This is how we Jews call the Bible, the Tanakh. And the Tanakh is a made-up word of 3 letters. The T stands for Torah, okay, the 5 books of Moses. Then the N of the word Tanakh stands for Nevi'im, for the prophets. And the K of the word Tanakh stands for Ketuvim, the writings. So we all know about the 5 books of Moses and the Torah. And most of us are pretty much aware of it. It's the second section of the Bible, or the Tanakh. And we start with the histories, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. And then we go into the actual Nevi'im. The 3 great prophets were Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And then we have what's known as the Trei Asar, the 12 minor prophets. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. That's the middle, the second section. By the way, all the Haftorahs come from that middle section. And then finally, we have the Ketuvim, the writings. What's in this third section of the Bible? Well, we have the book of Psalms, then we have the book of Proverbs, then the book of Job. Then we have the 5 Megillot, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Esther, and Ecclesiastes, one of the 5 Megillot. And then finally, we end with histories. We've got Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the book of Chronicles. Okay, so the book of Ecclesiastes, one of the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls, and Ecclesiastes comes in that third section, the writings. And it's considered part of wisdom literature. By the way, we read traditionally, liturgically, we read the book of Ecclesiastes on Sukkot, okay, on usually Shmini Atzeret. We read, why? Because some say that we've just gotten through the ordeal of judgment of Yom Kippur. And then we've switched to the harvest season and the joy of Sukkot. And the book of Ecclesiastes is a kind of a speed bump. Don't let yourself get carried away, right? It's almost to throw cold water in our face by its topic and the way that it sobers us from what might otherwise be unbridled joy. Okay, so we're ready to dive into the book. And we're going to do a close reading. I'll give you the Hebrew and the English. Again, I'm working from this book of the Chamesh Megillot, the 5 Megillot scrolls. And but you can use any copy from any translation of Ecclesiastes. And we will go through word by word, line by line, chapter by chapter through the book. We start the following way. Divrei Kohelet ben David, Melech b'Yerushalayim. It's almost poetic in terms of the rhythm. And here we have the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, we got to stop there, because who was a son of David who was king in Jerusalem? It's only one person, and that would be Solomon. But it doesn't say the words of Solomon. It says the words of Kohelet. Who is that? Why is that? What are we talking about? Nobody knows. Kohelet, from the word kahal. Kahal means a group. It means a community. Kehila means a community. And here we're told these are the words of Kohelet, the son of David. David didn't have a son, Kohelet. And it seems like we're talking about Solomon, but we don't use the name Solomon. Why not? And where did Kohelet come from? And the et ending of Kohelet seems to indicate not so much a name as an occupation. And what most scholars will come to is the idea that the word Kohelet, the name Kohelet, means the assembler, the one who brings together. Now, whether it's he brings together the kahal and he preaches to the community, the kahal, hence Kohelet, or other people say he's Kohelet because he's assembling not people, but wisdom, which he wants to impart. Almost proverbs and little sayings that he wants to teach people. Okay, so we got to think, why did the author say, Divrei Kohelet ben David, Melech b'Yerushalayim? On the one hand, he wants you to think that he's referring to Solomon. And there's going to be other things in the book, mention of this man's great wealth, mention of this man's great wisdom, both which would seem to apply to Solomon. But he doesn't say the words of Solomon. He makes up this name, Kohelet. Why does he do that? And so traditionally, our people didn't ask a lot of questions when it came to this, and they accepted that Solomon wrote the book. And hence, the teaching that I started with, that Solomon wrote Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, when he was an old man and he was dealing with looking back on the vanities of life. But there's another possibility, which is by saying the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, that the author, whoever he is, and it's probably not a guy named Kohelet, the author basically wanted to say, I want you to pretend as if Solomon is writing this book. But by leaving out his name, And by telling you it was the words of Kohelet, I'm telling you straight out, it's not Solomon. It is Solomon, it's not Solomon. I want you to live in both of those possibilities at the same time. Okay. How do we know it's not Solomon? That when you read from a literary point of view, we realize that this is a book that if Solomon lived like 950 BCE, scholars pretty much can tell that this book was written sometime in the 3rd century BCE. In other words, maybe around 250 BCE, 700 years after Solomon lived. How do we know that? The style of Hebrew, there are certain Persian words like pardes and pitgam, which are used by the author, which Solomon would have had no way of being aware of, and only became part of the knowledge of people, Jews in the Middle East, by the 3rd century. Okay, so what happens in the 3rd century BCE? So we're after Alexander the Great. The Greeks have pretty much conquered the world and divided it up. And we're going to lead eventually to the Maccabean period in the 2nd century BCE. So we're in the Hellenistic period where there's a great deal of influence of Greek culture. Okay, and as we will soon see, this is a book that's not a traditional religious, pious book, but it seems to represent, just like we said with the book of Proverbs in wisdom literature, this may very well be rich, upper middle class men who were sitting around and thinking deep thoughts. Okay, so we also know that that's the time period. By the way, just like if you read Shakespeare, you would immediately know that it was not written in 2020. There's a style to Shakespeare that tells you that this is from the 1600s. And that's 400 years ago. We're talking about a style from Solomon to Kohelet is 700 years later. So you can imagine how language changes. So one last word I need to say, and it's this, that sometimes we think the Bible, right? It's one idea, it's one philosophy, it's one thought, and a lot of pages, but basically it's a unity. And what you really need to know is that the Bible is an anthology of many, many different works from various times and places that represent very different viewpoints. Sometimes we're going to see opposite and contradictory viewpoints in the Bible. You're going to even see contradictory viewpoints in the book of Ecclesiastes. Where did we get the name Ecclesiastes? It sounds Greek. It comes from the Greek. It's the Greek, it's really from the Latin transliteration of the Greek translation of the word Kohelet, which means, again, the assembler, one who brings together somebody. That's what Ecclesiastes in English means, and but in Hebrew, we always refer to it as Kohelet. So verse 2, now we know who the guy is. We don't know who the guy is who is telling us this. And here's the second verse. Havel havalim amar Kohelet. Havel havalim hakol havel. And again, you can hear this notion of a rhythm, right? So whether we're dealing with poetry or something else, hard to know. Our translation says Utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility. All is futile. Can you imagine King Solomon as an old man looking back over his life, over all that he accomplished? He created this great kingdom. He built the temple, magnificent palace. He made Israel into a world power. And at the end of his life, he looks back and he says it was all a waste of time. Utter futility. Now, is it the point of Kohelet, of the Bible, that this is what we should believe? No. You will find opposite views in other places about the meaning and the purpose of life. What Kohelet is going to do for us is force us to ask questions. As you will see, the author, who calls himself Kohelet, the author is in search of what is the meaning of life. We don't have to like his answer, Kohelet. The author is in search of what is the meaning of life. We don't have to like his answer. We don't have to buy it. But his questions are the crucial thing. And those we need to pay attention to. And we need to ask ourselves the same questions. And then if we don't like his answers, and mostly we won't, we have to say, okay, what do we think? What's our answer? By the way, whereas our translation said utter futility, another modern translation says merest breath, said Kohelet. Merest breath. All is mere breath. I want you to imagine a cold day and somebody exhales and you see the smoke come out of their mouth. That's what he's talking about. That's what Kohelet means, that you see it for a second and then it's gone. That's what life is. You breathe out, you see vapors, and then it's all gone. It's all over. Okay? So this incredible pessimistic view of life, why does he say this? Why did he come to this point? By the way, something else I want to show you in terms of his poetry. He says, Hakol Havel. Okay? Hakol, from the word all. Hakol, everything is Havel. King James said, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. That's probably not a correct translation. What we've got, either utter futility or merest breath, is closest to what the Bible really meant. Havel. But I want you to look at this phrase, Hakol Havel. You'll see that they both begin with a hey, they both end with a lamed, and in the middle, Hakol, everything. You've got a kaf, and then in Havel, you've got a vet, right? The words are extremely similar. Hakol, everything is Havel, is just a breath. Life is, vapor. But I want you to look even more carefully, the cleverness here. What's the difference? The first letter is the same, the third letter is the same. What's the difference between the middle letters, kaf and a vet, right? They both look like the back C, except you've got this tiny little piece over here that changes a kaf into a vet. Hakol, which means everything. Havel, which means nothing. What's the difference between everything and nothing? This tiny little piece sticking out. What's the difference between somebody being a billionaire and somebody being homeless on the street? Ultimately, it could be that much, right? That fortune can turn that quickly. So he's playing a game with us. Hakol havel. Everything is nothing. Right? And how easy it is to go from everything into nothing. Also, I want you to listen, especially in the first 7 lines, to the way things repeat. Havel, havelim, Amar Kohelet. Havel, havalim. Hakol, havel. Right? And then if you look at the 3rd verse, he says, Ma yitron le'adam. What value is there for a man? B'chol amalo sheya'amol. In all that he struggles with, all the gains he makes, tachat hashamesh. And you'll notice in this 3rd line, the repetition of amalo sheya'amol. This constant repeating, and he's doing this, and he's going to do it again and again and again. Why does he do this? By using the same words over and over again, he's basically saying to us in poetry and in words, same old, that life, there's nothing new. It's all a repeat. What was is what is. Nothing new. And that's why he uses repetition of words over and over again. Okay, so line 4, dor holech v'dor ba. One generation goes, another generation comes. Notice the repetition of the word dor. V'ha'aretz liolam omadet. And the earth remains the same. One generation comes, one generation goes, nothing changes. It's all the same. Verse 5, V'zarach hashemesh, uva hashamesh. The sun rises and the sun sets. Again, he repeats the word shemesh. V'el mikomo shoef, and it glides back, zoreach sham, where it rose from. Okay? So the sun comes up, the sun goes down, and it's just this endless cycle, one thing after another. And by repeating the words, he's banging us on the head with, it's the same, it's over and over again, right? Repeating and repeating, both in the words and in the ideas. And then we come to verse 6. Holech el darom, it blows to the south, v'sovev el tzafon, and it turns northward. Sovev, holech haruach, v'al sevivotav shav haruach. Ever turning the wind on its rounds, the wind returns. So we saw that the sun keeps going in a cycle, and the wind, it's the same thing. It goes this way, comes back that way, goes this way and that way. And again, you hear the word sovev, which repeats, v'sovev el tzafon, sovev, olech haruach, v'al sevivotav, over and over again. Nothing new. It's a repetition. Life is same old, same old. What's today is what was yesterday. And then in verse 7, a magnificent piece of poetry here. Kol hanichalim holchim el hayam. All streams or all rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. Imagine that, right? They saw that rivers run to the sea, and yet the sea stays the same level, right? You'd think that it would ultimately overflow and flood, but that's not what happens. By the way, Elie Wiesel's memoir and autobiography chose this verse, all streams, all rivers flow into the sea. Kol hanichalim holchim el hayam, v'hayam einenu maleh, but the sea is never filled. El mekom shahanichalim holchim, sham hem shavim lalechet. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. So what's he have in mind? I mean, everything is going down into the sea. You don't see the sea flowing back up into the land. What they probably meant was that the rivers flow into the sea, and then underneath the earth, you've got water which comes back and the springs. And so whereas above the sun is going in circles, below on earth, the water is going in circles as well. And then above us, just above us, the wind goes this way and that way. And so he's pounding us with these incredible images of the sun, of the wind, of the water, which are going this way and then coming back the other way. Brings us to verse 8. Kol hadvarim yigeim, lo yuchal ish lidaber. All things of life are wearisome. If you stop and you think about them and you consider them, it's just going to give you a headache. It's just going to make you tired. All things are wearisome. And then he says, Lo yuchal ish lidaber. A human being you can't even discuss, you can't even utter, you can't even say all of this. And then he goes on and he says, Lo tispa ayin lirot. The eye never has enough of seeing. Velo timale ozen mishma, nor the ear enough of hearing. So having spoken about sun and wind and water, and now he comes to the human being, and we can't describe what's going on. We can't really even see everything. We can't even hear. So these triplets of nature, triplets of man are going on. And then in verse 9, Ma shahaya, what was, hu sheyihiyeh, that's what will be. Uma shena'asa, and what was, hu sheye'aseh, and what was is what will be. Ve'ein kol chadash tachat hashamash, and there is nothing new under the sun. This is another of the very famous lines that's moved from Hebrew literature into Western English literature. There is nothing new under the sun. Comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. So let's stop for a minute and question that. Really? There's nothing new that's under the sun? When I was a kid, we had tin can telephones, and then the princess telephone. And, we work our way up, and now I've got, my iPhone. What do you mean there's nothing new under the sun? Technology is constantly changing. So the guy is wrong. Is it he's wrong because he lived 2,000 years ago when there wasn't technology? So in his world, he looked around and things didn't really change that much. But of course, once we get to the Industrial Revolution and we get to the 20th century, 21st century, there's revolutions that are happening every day. So that's one possibility. He's simply out of date. He lived at the wrong time. And what he said then doesn't apply today. But in another realm, you could make the case that he's right. There is nothing new under the sun. Yes, technology changes, right? People used to build, fires and smoke signals or beat drums to communicate. And now we have electricity. So technology changes. But the point is that human nature doesn't change. Maybe that's what Kohelet is trying to convey. That yes, these, things around us, they don't seem to change. But within us, within, what human beings care about, and the foibles of human beings, and the feelings and the jealousies, those things are always the same. So again, we have to figure out, was he right or was he wrong? Was he speaking for his time? It doesn't work for our time. Or is he telling us an important lesson about our own time? That we think we're so sophisticated. We think we're so wonderful. We think we're so advanced. And the truth is that in all the years of human existence, people are still the same. And that doesn't change at all. So that question, there's nothing new under the sun, becomes a challenge for us. Verse 10, Yesh davar sheyomar re'eh ze chadashu. Sometimes there's a thing, of which people will say, re'eh ze chadash, look, this is new. And he shakes his head and he says, Kvar haya le'olamim. It occurred long ago. Asher haya milfanenu, in ages that went by before us. Verse 11, Ein zichron larishonim. The earlier ones, people who lived a long time ago, Ein lahem, ein zichron. There's no remembrance, no sign of them today. V'gam la'acharonim sheyiyu, and for the people who will live at the end of times, lo yihyeh lahem zikaron. Nobody will remember the people who lived a long time ago. Tell you the truth, people will not remember the people who will live in the future. Im sheyu la'acharonam. So too, those that will occur later will be no more remembered than those that will occur at the very end. So here's this Kohelet, maybe Solomon, maybe not, who's telling us nobody's going to remember you. And these are incredibly disturbing ideas for us to accept, that you're gone and it's all over with. It's very similar to some of the things we say at the Yizkor service. We're like grass, we grow up and then we're gone, we're dried up, and, beyond the people who remember you at Yizkor, what's left of us? So he says in verse 12, Ani Kohelet, Hayiti Melech al Yisrael B'Yerushalayim. Sort of a repeat of what he started with. And again, this idea of same thing over again, repetition. I, Kohelet, I was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And now he tells us why he's writing this book, what his goal was. He says, Natati et libi, I gave my heart, I set my heart, lidrosh vilatur bechokhmah. I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom. Now remember, he's pretending to be Solomon. And as Solomon, everybody, what do you know about Solomon? Wisest man who ever lived. So by pretending to be Solomon, he has his CV, his bona fides, and we can say, if anybody should know the meaning of life, it's this guy who's sort of hinting that he was Solomon, wisest man. And if anybody knows the mysteries of life, this guy will. And he says, what I attempted to do was to lidrosh vilatur. Lidrosh, same word as midrash, which means to search, to investigate. Lidrosh vilatur, to look around, to check out. Latour in the sense of to tour, to take a tour of the world, of life, and what happens. With wisdom, I'll call asher na, to look at everything that there is. Tachat hashamayim, underneath the sun, underneath the heavens. Hu inyan ra. And then he says, it's an unhappy business. Now he's going to jump ahead, and before he takes us step by step, he's going to give you the final line, the bottom line, the answer. And he tells us, inyan ra. It's bad news. You want to know about life? Inyan ra. It's an unhappy business. Natan Elohim livnei ha'adam la'anod bo. That God gave man to be concerned with. That life is filled with pain and suffering and misery. Why did God do this to us? We got to say a word about God here. You'll notice when Jews speak about God in Hebrew, we generally use one of two words in prayers, for instance, or in the Torah. One is Yud He Vav He, which we pronounce as Adonai, which is God's personal name. Okay? And the other word is Elohim, which is simply God. And the idea is Adonai, Yud He Vav He, is, number one, it's a more personal name. Number two, Adonai, there's the sense of this is the God of love, the God of mercy. And then there's another God or another side to God, which is Elohim. And this is a God who is more distant, a God this is the God of judgment, right? Doesn't so much love us as he judges us, rewards us if we're worthy, but punishes us if we're not. And you'll notice that here in the 3rd century BCE, Kohelet is using this distant idea of God, not the God that, not Tevye's God, who you talk to, you can argue with, you ask for favors, you're in love with, you're angry with. This is a more distant God. It's Elohim. And that's the God of the book of Kohelet. Okay? So he tells us, we come now to verse 14. Ra'iti et kol hama'asim. I observed all the happenings beneath the sun. Shena'asu tachat hashamash. I spent many years and with great wisdom checking everything out. V'hinei, and behold, hakol hevel, everything is futile, or everything is merest breath. It's out and it's gone and it's over, never to be found again. And he uses an even stronger term. I checked and I studied and I concluded everything is futile and ureut ruach. And here they translate pursuit of wind. You could also say reut means to try to shepherd. It's one thing if you're a shepherd and you've got sheep and this one's running over there and that one's running over there. Okay, so you can catch that one and bring them back, and then you can go on and bring them back. It's exhausting. It's driving you crazy, but you can keep your eye on 50 sheep and you can herd them. But what he's saying, life is basically re'ut ruach. Life is herding the wind. Try to run after the wind and bring it back. You can't do it. It's impossible. And this is what this old man who calls himself Kohelet and wants you to think that he's Solomon. He said, that's what life is. It's a waste. It's hurting the wind. You're chasing one thing after another. You're never going to catch it. Verse 15. Me'uvat lo yuchal litkon. That last word, litkon, from the same word tikkun, like tikkun olam, to repair, to fix, to correct the world. So he says here, and here's another famous line from the book of Ecclesiastes, a twisted thing cannot be made straight. Now, is that true or not? You know, there are things, that are metal, that if it's twisted, can you really make it perfect again? Once it's been bent, you may get it somewhat back. You're never going to fix it completely. You're never going to repair it. So he says, twisted thing cannot be made straight. And he tells us the chesron, and something that's missing or that's lacking, lo yuchal lehimanot, cannot be made good. If something is lost, you won't find it ever again. Verse 16, Dibarti ani im libi. I said to myself. In Hebrew, it's I spoke with my heart, but it really means I said to myself. And again, here is Kohelet, who's deciding, here's the mission. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Ani hine higdalti, I grew up, vehosafti chokhmah, and I have grown richer and wiser, al kol asher haya lefanai, than anyone who lived before me. And he's playing on this idea of Solomon as the wisest and richest of kings. And so he's playing that role, right? He's playing the part of Solomon. Lefanai al Yerushalayim. There was nobody before me who was as smart or as rich as me. And he says, V'libi ra'a harbe chokhmah v'da'at. And my mind was zealously absorbed wisdom and learning. So I devoted myself to finding out all that I could about how things work, why things work. 17, Etna libi, and I set my mind, literally, I put my heart, but the idea is I set my mind, la da'at chokhmah, to understand wisdom, to appraise wisdom, v'da'at holelut v'sichlut. And then he says something very interesting. It's not that I went to Harvard and I took a BA, and then I took a master's degree, then I took my PhD, then I took postdoctoral fellowships, right? Not only did he do that and was the most serious student of all, but he also did something else. He did the opposite, which is v'dat holelot v'sichlut. I set my mind to appraise madness and folly. I did that, but then I also did everything that was stupid and fun and pleasurable. I did it all. I checked out this world, I checked out that world. Maybe if I was a Harvard PhD, that would teach me the meaning of life. Maybe if I slept late each day and I got drunk and I took drugs and I fooled around and I set my mind to that, he said, maybe I'd say this is the right path. Forget about it. Maybe I'd say this is what a person should do. He said, but I tried them both. I did it all. That's the incredible thing. Now, you or I may not have the time, the money, the ability to try this world, that world. But the assumption is that Solomon could have, right? He had the wisdom and he had the wealth. He could indulge every pleasure that he wanted to find out, is this what life is all about? And he says, Yadati shegam zehu ra'ayon ruach. And after trying this out, and after trying this out, what conclusion did I come to? That this too was chasing after the wind. Oh my God. So it's one thing if you say, I wasted my life trying to go up the corporate ladder, wasted my life studying, getting a PhD. But he's also saying, and I also tried everything else. And I got to tell you, both things are running after the wind. So where's he going to take us? What are you supposed to do if this is no good, and if that's no good, if this is a waste of time, if it's all futile, if it's all trying to herd the wind? What message does Kohelet have for us? How am I supposed to live my life? That's what we're going to find out, right? And that's where we're at. So the final verse for today is we read, Ki barov chokhmah rav ka'at. For as wisdom grows, anger or vexation grows. The more I learned, the more it upset me. And he tells us, V'yosif dat, yosif machov. And you increase learning, and you will only increase heartache. So stunning words from somebody who's supposed to be this holy King Solomon, who we know is not. He's pretending to be, so he can get away with getting our attention. Oh, I'll listen to what Solomon says. He should know. But, we're stunned after the first chapter by us. I checked it all out. It's a waste of time. It's all a waste of time. So wait a minute, chapter 2, what are you going to do? Kill yourself? What's left? We'll see you next week, and we'll get to that.